Emma hadn't expected a soul that morning. The house sat in one of those deep hushes that only arrived when Daniel was away traveling for work. The sort of silence that settled in like dust on untouched furniture. She followed her quiet rituals, the ones that made the mornings feel less empty, pulling on a soft sweater, pouring herself a cup of coffee, watching the steam curl upward as she gazed through the kitchen window. Outside, the trees were dressing themselves in autumn's colors, gold seeping into the leaves, red spilling faintly at the edges. There was beauty in the sight, but it pressed against the ache tucked inside her chest. The loneliness felt thick, familiar, heavy, constant. When the doorbell rang, she almost didn't stir. Probably the mailman or a neighbor asking about a misplaced package. But something, a subtle difference in the tone of the chime perhaps, drew her in. She wiped her hands on a towel, crossed the hallway, and opened the door. Then she stopped short. Standing before her was Michael, Daniel's younger brother, his hands buried loosely in his pockets, a half-smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It had been years since she'd last set eyes on him, back during that crowded family dinner, when laughter ricocheted around the table and no one could fit all the food in one place. Back then, he had been younger, restless, eyes bright with the kind of ease only youth granted. Now, that boyishness had matured into something quieter, more grounded. There was a steadiness in him, an easy confidence that caught her attention immediately. "Emma," he greeted, voice calm and pleasantly even. "Thought I'd surprise you. I'm here in town for a bit." Her heart betrayed her with a sudden uninvited skip. That morning had begun in gray stillness, yet now something brighter was pressing against her chest. For weeks she had lived inside quiet days and quieter nights, the emptiness of a home missing its pulse. Seeing Michael there, smiling, felt like sunlight through overcast clouds. She stepped back and motioned him inside almost without thought, still trying to reorder her emotions into something sensible. He entered the living room with that unassuming grace he'd always possessed. The charm remained, but it had matured. His presence felt deeper somehow, less like Daniel's carefree brother, and more like a man shaped by distance, by experience, by time lived elsewhere. Emma realized she was smiling before she even noticed she'd done it. Smiling, an action that had felt foreign lately. There was something unexpectedly soothing about having someone there who looked at her as if she were more than background noise in an empty house. They gravitated to the kitchen table where sunlight spilled across the surface in long, thin bands. She offered him coffee. The kettle hissed and whistled softly, marking the start of their conversation. Michael spoke of Boston, of work and life, of changes that had happened quietly over the years. His voice filled the room with warmth, carrying a subtle energy that loosened the invisible weight around her. Emma leaned forward, listening, not out of politeness or habit, but genuine curiosity. Michael's humor surfaced naturally, his laughter low and contagious. He asked about her days, about how she managed while Daniel was gone. Those simple questions, small talk to most, struck her with surprising depth, as though someone had finally remembered to ask about her. When Daniel called from the road, the calls were clipped and pragmatic, flight details, meetings, appointments. No soft space left for "how are you really?" With Michael sitting across from her now, Emma felt seen in a way she hadn't in months. There was nothing bold, no unspoken confession rounding the edges of their words. Yet something tender rose up between them, a quiet stirring she didn't dare name. She told herself it was the comfort of company, the gentle echo of family. Still, when his smile came again, that same easy, radiant smile that had greeted her at the door, she could almost feel the loneliness slipping off her shoulders. As the hours moved forward, the house seemed to shift. What had been stale and quiet began to breathe again. His laughter filled the corners, and her own joined it, a sound she had nearly forgotten. He spoke about Boston's hurried rhythm, the way people there rarely looked up long enough to notice each other. She shared bits of her own slow days, and in those exchanges they uncovered a shared solitude. Different stories, same ache. They stepped out later, deciding to walk before the sun began to set. The air outside was crisp and scented with fallen leaves. Emma adjusted her scarf as they strolled side by side under a canopy of burnished trees. Their silence was the good kind, the easy kind that didn't need words to stay comfortable. "You know, Emma," Michael said at last, voice softened by thought, "I've always admired how you make this place feel warm. Even when Daniel's busy, it always feels alive here because of you." His words touched her with a warmth that unsettled her. She wasn't used to compliments that carried sincerity instead of courtesy. She murmured a quiet thank you, though inside, something delicate began to stir, fluttering like leaves brushed by wind. When they returned home, Emma suggested dinner. The idea felt sudden yet right. They moved together through the kitchen like partners in an old routine, chopping, stirring, and passing each other utensils with the easy rhythm of people who understood silence as much as speech. Each accidental brush of his hand against hers sent small, unmistakable sparks through her. She reminded herself who he was, Daniel's brother, and pressed that truth into her heart like a safeguard. And still, she couldn't ignore the warmth blooming in the simple presence of him. At dinner, he teased her about the seasoning, and she laughed, really laughed. The sound of it startled her, light and unguarded. Michael grinned, pretending innocence, but there was a gentleness behind his teasing that deepened the air between them. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but there was a pull there, undeniable and quietly electric. Later, the lamp in the living room cast its soft amber light as they settled onto the couch. Emma fetched an old family photo album, flipping open the cover that hadn't been touched in years. Together they lingered over frozen moments, Christmas gatherings, beach vacations, birthdays blurred with laughter. When they found the wedding picture, hers and Daniel's, it caught them both. Emma paused, fingertips grazing the edge of the photograph. She remembered the promise of that day, all the bright certainty, the laughter, the belief that love would fill every silence. Now the image felt distant, bittersweet. Michael looked down at it quietly. "You looked beautiful that day," he said after a moment. The softness in his tone sent a ripple through her. The words were simple, but they stayed hanging in the air, longer than they should have. Her heart stuttered again. Their eyes met, a glance that lingered for a breath longer than was proper, long enough for something unspoken to flicker between them. It wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to happen, and yet it did. Emma looked away quickly, gathering her composure, noticing how still the room had become. In that fragile quiet, she understood something new and unsettling, that the feeling growing inside her wasn't just gratitude or relief. It was recognition, being seen, being understood, being quietly lifted out of invisibility. The doorstep earlier that morning had been the spark, the place the grayness began to break. But the memory of that gaze lingered. The evening stretched on, and soon it was time for Michael to leave. As he stood at the door, Emma felt an unexpected heaviness settle over her. She didn't want the day to end. His presence had filled the house with life again, and she wasn't ready to return to the silence. Michael smiled at her the same way he had that morning, a smile that felt like warmth on a cold day. "I'll stop by tomorrow if that's okay," he said. Emma nodded, her voice catching slightly as she replied, "I'd like that." As the door closed behind him, Emma leaned against it, her heart racing. The day had been simple coffee, a walk, dinner, conversation. But to her it felt extraordinary. Something had shifted, something delicate and unspoken, yet powerful enough to change the way she saw him alone again. Emma replayed the moments in her mind. The walk, the laughter, the photo album, that lingering look. She tried to remind herself that Michael was Daniel's brother, that lines existed for a reason. But deep down she knew her heart had already started to blur them, and it scared her almost as much as it thrilled her. The next few days passed quickly, each one bringing Michael and Emma closer in ways neither had planned. What began as casual visits soon turned into a quiet rhythm. Michael would knock on the door with groceries in hand or tools to fix something small around the house. Emma found herself waiting for those knocks, listening for them with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Every time he showed up, the loneliness she had been carrying seemed to fade, replaced by a feeling she couldn't quite name. One morning, Emma was struggling with a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet. Daniel had promised to fix it months ago, but it had remained untouched. When Michael saw her fumbling with the screwdriver, he stepped in gently, taking it from her hand. "Let me," he said with a calm smile. She watched as he worked, his focus steady, his movements. Sure, the sound of the hinge clicking back into place was small, but to Emma, it meant everything. It wasn't just about fixing the cabinet. It was about someone noticing, someone caring enough to take action. Afterward, they sat at the table, a soft silence hanging between them. Emma wanted to thank him, but the words felt too small compared to the weight of her gratitude. Michael broke the silence with an easy laugh. "You know, I don't think I've spent this much time in one place in years. It feels good." His eyes met hers, and for a second, neither of them looked away. The connection was undeniable, but fragile, like a thread they were both afraid to pull. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the backyard in golden light, Emma and Michael stood side by side. The quiet stretched on until Michael spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Emma, I don't want to make things complicated, but being here with you, it feels different. I can't pretend I don't notice it." Her heart pounded at his words. She wanted to step back, to protect herself, but she couldn't move. His honesty mirrored the very thoughts he had been hiding from herself. She whispered, "Michael, we can't." But her voice trembled. He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer, yet the space between them felt charged. Emma turned her eyes to the horizon, trying to find calm in the fading light. She thought of Daniel, of the years they had built together, of the promises she had made, but she also thought of the silence that filled their marriage. The way her voice seemed to vanish when Daniel was near. The way she often felt invisible in her own home. Standing beside Michael, she felt the opposite scene. Heard, understood. The conflict tore at her heart, leaving her caught between loyalty and longing. Michael spoke again, his tone gentle. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to hurt you, but I need you to know how I feel." His words were careful, deliberate, but they carried the weight of truth. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to stop him, to tell him they should bury these feelings, but she couldn't deny them either. That night, Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She could still see the way Michael had looked at her. The softness in his eyes, the quiet pain in his voice. She thought of the kindness he had shown, the laughter he'd brought back into her days, the simple joy of his company. The feelings inside her felt dangerous, but also alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The following day, Michael returned with bags of groceries. "I thought I'd cook for us tonight," he said casually, as if nothing had happened the evening before. Emma hesitated at first, but let him in, watching him move confidently in the kitchen. Chopping, stirring, humming softly, made her chest ache with emotions she couldn't control. When he handed her a plate and smiled, she couldn't help but smile back. Even though part of her wanted to cry, dinner passed quickly, filled with easy conversation. But afterward, as they cleaned up together, their hands brushed when they both reached for the same dish. Neither pulled away immediately. Emma's breath caught, and when she finally looked up, Michael's gaze was already on hers. The room felt too small, the air too heavy. She broke the moment by stepping back, forcing a laugh. But inside, she was trembling. Later, as they sat in the living room, Michael leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Emma," he began slowly, "I don't expect anything from you. I want you to know that what I feel isn't something I can ignore, but I'll respect you always." His words were steady, yet she could see the storm behind them. Emma's heart twisted. She admired his restraint, his respect, even while her own emotions threatened to spill over. She wanted to tell him she felt it too, that she hadn't felt this kind of connection in so long, but the words never came. Instead, she gave him a look filled with all the things she couldn't say out loud, and in that silent exchange, everything was understood. The evening ended quietly. Michael left with a polite smile, but Emma could see the sadness in his eyes. She closed the door slowly, leaning against it as tears finally escaped. She wasn't crying out of guilt alone. She was crying because part of her didn't want to let him go. In the days that followed, Emma tried to bussy herself, but every corner of the house reminded her of Michael's presence. The repaired cabinet, the groceries in the fridge, the sound of his laughter still echoing faintly in her memory. She found herself replaying his words, his gaze, his smile. Each memory pulled at her heart, reminding her of the choice she would eventually have to make. Michael, too, kept his distance, visiting less often. Though Emma could sense the unspoken tension in every interaction, it wasn't anger or regret, was longing held tightly in place by restraint. And though they both tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, the truth lingered between them, unshakable and undeniable. Emma knew the path ahead was unclear. She couldn't ignore her vows, nor could she dismiss the emotions that had taken root so suddenly, so powerfully. For now, all she could do was carry the weight of both the loyalty she owed and the longing she felt. And each time she thought of Michael's quiet confession, her heart whispered what her lips never dared to say. The final evening arrived sooner than Emma expected. Daniel was due home the next morning, and the quiet tension that had been building all week pressed heavier on her chest. She stood at the window, watching the fading light slip across the street, when she heard Agental knock at the door. Her heart knew it was Michael before she even opened it. He stood there with a small suitcase to his side, a smile soft, but not as bright as the first day. There was acidness in his eyes, a weight that matched her own. Emma's throat tightened as she stepped back to let him in, though part of her wished she could freeze time, keep him on that doorstep forever. Inside, the house felt different. The warmth of their laughter, the easy comfort they had shared, now seemed fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Michael placed the suitcase by the door and turned to face her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was full, carrying all the unspoken words they had been holding back. Finally, Michael broke it. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to tell you this before I leave. These days with you, they've meant more to me than I can explain. But I can't stay. Not like this." His honesty cut through her. She wanted to stop him, to beg him not to go, but her lips refused to move. Instead, she felt tears sting her eyes. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough for her to see the conflict written across his face. "I respect you," he continued, his voice steady but full of feeling. "And I respect my brother. Whatever I feel, whatever you feel, it has to end here." Emma's heart ached. She wanted to argue to tell him that what they shared was real, that it had awakened something inside her she hadn't felt in years. But at the same time, she knew he was right. She'd made promises, vows that couldn't be undone by a fleeting moment, no matter how powerful it felt. She whispered, her voice trembling, "Michael, I don't want this to be the end." He shook his head gently, his eyes filled with sorrow. "It has to be, because if we don't stop now, we'll regret it later, and I don't want to see you carry regret. I'd rather leave with the memory of what we shared, pure and untouched, than let it turn into something that breaks us both." The word hit her harder than she expected. Emma turned away, pressing her hand against her lips to keep the sob from escaping. Michael watched her, his own jaw tight as though he were holding back his own pain. After a long pause, she managed to face him again. Her tears fell freely now, but her voice steadied. "You've reminded me of something. I forgot that my heart is still alive. For that, I'll always be grateful." Michael's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, Emma thought he might reach out, hold her, say the words she longed to hear. But instead, he simply gave her a look that carried everything: affection, restraint, longing, and farewell all at once. He picked up his suitcase and walked toward the door. Emma followed each step heavy, her heart pulling in two directions. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. "Take care of yourself, Emma. You deserve happiness even if it isn't with me." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Her tears blurred his figure, but she memorized the outline of his face, the gentleness of his expression, the final gift of his smile. It was the same smile that had lit her morning at the doorstep, the same smile that had changed everything. Michael stepped into the night, his footsteps fading into the quiet street. Emma closed the door slowly, her hand lingering on the nobus, though holding on to him for just a moment longer. The house was silent again, but it no longer felt like the same silence she had known before. This one was heavier, filled with the memory of what could never be. She leaned against the door, her body trembling as the tears finally escaped in full. It wasn't just sadness, it was release too. She knew she had felt something rare, something powerful, even if it was only for a short while. And though athert, she also knew it had reminded her of her own strength, her own capacity to feel deeply. That night, Emma lay awake in bed, staring into the darkness. Daniel would be home tomorrow, and life would return to its usual rhythm. She would greet him, listen to his stories, and carry on as she always had. But in her heart, she knew she had changed. She'd discovered that love wasn't just about routine or promises. It was about being seen, being valued, being alive. Michael's departure left a hollow space inside her, but it also left a spark. She knew she would never forget his words, his kindness, or the way his smile had made her feel. It wasn't a love story that could be lived, but it was one that would always stay in her memory, etched like a secret chapter in her heart. As dawn began to touch the edges of the sky, Emma finally closed her eyes. She whispered to herself, "Some moments aren't meant to last. They're meant to remind us." And in the quiet of her room, she held on to that truth. She had let him go, but the memory of his smile would always remain a light she could carry even in the silence.